Hello and welcome. Today is Sunday, January 10, 2016. This is Paul Sandhu coming to you with another episode of Wake Up and Live Radio. First of all, Happy New Year to all my viewers and listeners. It's been a while since I've done a program, and that's because of some personal challenges over the holiday season, which are now behind, and we are now ready to jump into another year and bring some good guests and good programs to you. Today I have on the line as my first guest of the year and a very popular one of that, Mr. Jim Willie. Dr. Jim Willie joining me down in Costa Rica. Jim Willie is the editor of the Hat Trick Letter found on his website goldenjackass.com. And so without further ado, hello and welcome, Jim.
Oh, good to be back. Holidays are always a strange, unusual, weird experience, especially down here where, my family's up north, but they don't want to have too much to do with me anyway. So I just struggle, and you had some struggles, but it's all good, and the summer has begun here in Costa Rica. We've had 2 or 3 weeks of it, and by that I mean 75, 77 degree weather, mild breeze, almost total sun. It's nice. It's going to be nice for 3 months here, 4 months. And we earn it, because when you have your summer with the sunsets after 9 p.m., we have rain every afternoon and don't see a sunset for months. So, we're having our summer now. The kids are out of school. I'm a bit psyched. It's good. 2016 is starting out ugly. I expected that. The voice said back in late November, right around Thanksgiving, he said, the plug has been pulled. And you can interpret that any which way you want, but a lot of moving parts now, and the United States is one of several. We are not running the show anymore. The U.S. and the Western banker cabal are no longer in charge. This is extremely big. But what it means is, even though they're no longer at the helm, they're throwing grenades everywhere.
So it's like almost sounds like a scorched earth policy, but we will discuss that. But you're right, 2016 has had a very, very volatile start, much more so than the last couple of years, which were volatile in their own right. And now, if you were to just take I'll make a little list of everything that's going on. We have the Saudi spring or Saudi autumn, as in Saudi fall. The stock market is trending downwards. Oil prices are still cratering. And the Fed has they increase the rates, which may be a smokescreen more than anything else. Retail sales are catastrophic. Refugees in Germany are going ape. It's just the list goes on and on. So how about if we take some of these topics one at a time and start off with what's going on down in the Middle East, especially in regards to Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Do you think we've discussed in the past, Jim, that we expect that you mentioned this? I would say even going back to about a year and a half ago, that Saudi Arabia would also experience a Saudi spring, and it seems like it's now almost at the door. Is that would you agree with that? That there's something really significant is going on down there?
Yeah, let's get very plain about what the Saudi Arabia kingdom is. It is a gigantic fascist state. They don't have democracy there. They have a monarchy. They hide behind Islam, and they just exercise resource theft. 90% of the country's wealth is held in the hands of the royals. They export their wealth and store it in property outside the country and sovereign wealth funds and gold in Switzerland that the U.S. and London boys stole. But let's just focus on this Arab Spring concept for a minute. I don't have a lot of prepared notes, and these are thoughts off the top of my head, but the Arab Spring is given credit to the Obama administration as a foreign policy. And it's basically to disrupt the Arab monarchies And they actually, it's funny, they actually claim that the Washington Beltway boys and the neocon bandits, which are basically fascists and Nazis, the Washington boys want to install democracy in the Arab world.
Yeah.
I mean, can you think of anything more stupid? Something that's never existed in over 1,000 years. So they're gonna, yeah, that's what they're gonna do. Yeah, right. The hidden motive is to destroy their economies. The hidden motive is to steal their gold. It's like, let's beat the Arab bushes, and whatever moves, we'll steal. And while we're beating the bushes, let's create a Ukraine duplicate situation in Syria, which has a parallel to Ukraine. Ukraine was scorched and rampaged and ravaged in order to block a connection between Russia and Western Europe. They didn't, U.S. and the neocon Beltway bandit fascists did not want an energy linkage to create a marriage between the Russians and the Europeans, because that would have rendered the United States a little bit out in the cold, uninvited, and separated and floating derelict as a continent or a country. All right, so the same thing's going on in Syria. That Arab Spring erupted, and we had a lot of little side events, like Gaddafi and the Libyans wanted to set up an Arab gold dinar, and finally the neocons and the British said, we've had enough of this guy, let's go murder him. And we can steal 144 tons of gold while we're at it, and we can just create a real mess in Libya that they may not recover from for another 10 or 20 years, and that'll all be good for us. So, state-sponsored murder is a big issue now, and we're getting called on it. But Hillary was Secretary of State and thought it would be a good idea to use the U.S. Embassy in Benghazi, Libya, as a way station to move a bunch of weapons to the Arab Muslim Brotherhood through Egypt and get these weapons to Syria, where we need to create another Ukraine. So they sacrificed some Navy SEALs in Benghazi at the embassy, lied about it. And I just love Hillary's outspokenness. She actually said before Congress, what does it matter? And I like to point out the word it. A little two-letter pronoun, it. What is the antecedent of it that Hillary is referring to when pressured about the Benghazi incident where Ambassador Stevens was burned to death and murdered? The it is Hillary's treason. I just saw a long list, about 30 different items about various people that Hillary has been involved in as projects or appointments or something, and they all have a criminal or some incompetent background, yet she's running for president.
Right.
Okay, Hillary's running for president is more an example of the broken American state than any single point currently. So, back to the Arab Spring. It spread to Syria. And, I don't want to give a long background of ISIS. I've done this before, but ISIS was created after the nation building in Iraq turned out to be pretty much a big platform to support the Shiites and Iran. So, ISIS came in order to steal the oil fields, to control them, create a black market oil, which Wall Street now buys the oils from, in addition to Turkey. And the U.S. uses the Ankara Turkey embassy as a field operations center for ISIS, along with the Israelis, which are deeply involved in it. And there's some jokes running around that the Saudis' military is really ISIS. And it's pretty hard to dispute that because the lines are blurred. There's a number of Saudi military working with ISIS, but meanwhile the Saudis are preoccupied, bogged down, rather. I love that, bogged down. That's a Vietnam phrase. We're bogged down in Vietnam for 5 years. Yeah, we're bogged down, all right.
Right.
Well, the Arab Spring has now turned out to be a Saudi autumn, as in the fall of the House of Saud. The Saudis have tremendous problems. They're getting exposed as being narco traffickers. There was a Saudi prince who was arrested in Beirut with 32 boxes of heroin. He'll never serve a day in prison. And this is the way they pay the ISIS guerrillas. The ISIS was set up in order to create an independent terror organization with non-American mercenaries, because if you're going to let 1,000 guys die, it's good not to make them American. But we are seeing some Blackwater boys being killed in Yemen, in that other bogged down region for the Saudis. They're losing men, they're losing money, and they're losing their prestige. They're losing weapons, they're losing aircraft. Yemen's a mess.
Yeah, what's Yemen about? Like, that's a proxy war between Saudi and the Iranians. Would that be a correct assessment of that, or is that something else going on down there?
That's a good assessment, but that's only the head. I think the Saudis are looking to replace their depleted oil reserves. And it wasn't until Yemen discovered oil and gas that the Saudis decided that it's a terrorist state and needed to be dealt with. So they've learned some things from the Beltway boys in Washington and the abuse of the term terrorists. So if there's an enemy to the narco business, they call it a terrorist organization. If there's an enemy to the dollar usage in trade and banking, well, that's a terrorist organization. And they basically smear it, attack it, rape it. And the Saudis are doing in Yemen what the U.S. and Israelis have been doing in Lebanon and Syria now for the last several years, and that is killing civilians. Attack hospitals, attack schools. I'm talking about bombing missions from F-16s, F-17s, F-18s. Just come in, strafe, and bomb a hospital. This is what we do. This is what our allies do. These are war crimes.
Right.
And I think the blowback is going to be the fall of the House of Saud. They've got a senile new king. Fahd is long gone. Abdullah died a few months ago. Salman's in office, on the throne, rather. When I hear of on the throne, I think of sitting on the toilet, taking a dump in the morning. That's kind of what Salman's doing now. He's taking a dump on Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, KSA. It is going down. And you can go on for a long time describing the various factors. But they're running huge deficits as they jack up their oil output, driving down the oil price. I mean, so many weird stories out there how the Saudis are trying to wreck the U.S. shale industry. Oh, really? What a silly argument. No, we got a breakdown in the petrodollar contract. That whole platform is breaking down. And this is kind of a consequence of the Arab Spring, combined with quantitative easing, the monetary policy out of the United States and the Federal Reserve, the banker cabal. So it's all breaking down. The Saudis are in a tough spot. They can't say, well, let's do everything we can to lift the oil price, because if they do, they're going to have even larger deficits for their government. They can't do that, and neither can any of their neighbors. So they're all pumping oil, while Iran has been permitted to get out of the doghouse internationally. So the Saudi Spring is really more like an Iranian dawn, the Persian Empire return. And you mentioned that Yemen is really a proxy war between Iran and the Saudis. Yeah, I think that's a good description, but it's also Saudi's Vietnam. It's like a sick project from King Salman's son, who's taken control because his father's got senile dementia and doesn't really know what he had for breakfast anymore. He gets up in the morning and he doesn't know which women he slapped last night, you know. So the Saudis are going down. They've got serious budget problems. They've got exposure of their narcotics dependence. They're tight with the Bush family, which is really an object for being cut off. And a very strange little effect has come. There are a number of different organizations, including the Russian military, trying to cut off the Saudis and the Bush's narcotics connection through the Middle East. And one of the victims is the Jeb Bush presidential campaign.
Well, that's interesting.
It's dependent on narco money, and it got cut off. And you look at some of the stories coming out of Jeb Bush, and he's saying, well, we got some funding problems. And they don't give you details. They're not going to say, well, a couple princes got arrested with a ton of heroin in Saudi Arabia and Beirut, and it's interfered with our plans here in Florida. They don't talk like that. They can't talk like that. They will not talk like that. But I can. And, maybe there'll be consequences for me, but, so far so good. There's a lot of stuff going down, and I think the upshot of it is going to be this year we're going to get solid indications for the fall of the House of Saud. Their budgets are too big. The Islamic reform demands are too big internally. The women want more rights. And I always like to mention the Saudi royals and their appropriation games. They go into the offices of a well-run company, and let's just say the company is worth $500 million, and they offer them $100 million, or else they'll arrest them, offer them tax charges, offer them all kinds of different gimmicks to arrest them and interfere with their lives. So they end up selling their businesses to the Saudi royals. And the royals are collecting a lot of businesses this way, and there's a huge blowback, totally separate from Islamic reform and women's rights and all this. And it's so ugly in the Saudi world. It is so ugly. Their neighbors are probably going to experience similar things. I hear that Dubai is now broke in the United Arab Emirates, and Abu Dhabi is still thriving. Abu Dhabi, from what I understand, is where the real oil wealth is, and Dubai is where the international banking center and gold trade, and the souks, which is an Arab word for gold market. I mean, at a lower level, not a gold market internationally with price setting. I'm talking about buying and selling gold at a market. So a lot of moving parts here with this Arab Spring. I think the Arab Spring will go down in history as the Obama administration's foreign policy fiasco, much like his green energy and Obamacare is his domestic fiasco. This guy is probably the biggest fiasco who's ever hit the White House, and I'm utterly astonished that he has continued support from American people because
the media keeps the people stupefied.
Well, you can say that all you want, but when guys like my brother say I'm a big Obama supporter, I don't think it's because he gets whitewashed and brainwashed from the press. He's from Chicago. Obama's from Chicago. My brother's not aware of the gay men bathhouse, nor the fact that Michelle is a man and is called a beard, purchased from Reverend Wright's little consulting business. A beard is a nasty term for a purchased gay partner that it passes for a woman and enables a man to enter political life. I've got two separate, independent sources of information having nothing to do with finance, and each one says the same thing. I have a good friend who was a member of the gay bathhouse in Chicago, and it's a friend of a friend, and he said they are amazed inside the bathhouse that the news has not gone national about Obama's background with the gay bathhouse. And then there's another fellow who's a businessman and black, and he has a best friend who's in the same bathhouse. And he said, yeah, it's amazing. People can't figure it out or refuse to.
Right.
There's a lot of denial of information.
It's cognitive
anyway,
dissonance, I guess, and while you mentioned Chicago, this is an aside, but I heard that Chicago is fast turning into a Detroit, and it's becoming one of the most mismanaged cities in the whole country. And
well, certainly broke.
And the
their
whole
pension is broke. They're raising their property taxes. Their pension for teachers is broke. Everything's broken in Chicago. Yet, it's like to become qualified for president now, you have to come from a broken region and be a traitor and have a strong connection to narcotics.
Well, yeah, Chicago sure qualifies for that. But anyhow, getting back to this Arab Spring, so then what we are seeing right now is the fulfillment of your prognostication a couple of years ago that Saudi Arabia is going to be going down this route as well, what we saw in northern Africa 3-4 years ago. And of course, Syria itself is being destroyed in more ways than one. And I heard that the Iranian embassy in Yemen was bombed the other day, and now the Iranians are looking for possibly a hot war with Saudi Arabia. Is that also a possible outcome here?
They've already had a hot war. They've had one for several months. It's a proxy war. I would like to know for sure if Iranian officers are running things in Yemen or whether they make phone calls to run things. I think there are a few key, I love the old phrase from Vietnam, advisors. There's some field advisors, I think, from Iran that are operating in Yemen. But there's a big battle going on. The Saudis made a gigantic error. They executed by beheading an Iranian cleric who was, I guess, causing some problems inside Saudi Arabia. So there was a big attack demonstration, more demonstration than attack, in Tehran, Iran, of the Saudi embassy. But now the Saudis have bombed the Iranian embassy in Yemen. Yeah, I got something wrong about 6 or 8 months ago. I really didn't think Iran and Saudi Arabia would go at it and drop the gloves and draw blood, but they apparently have. I thought the Chinese were going to be an intermediary, and my phrase was the Chinese are going to make them play nice. They're not. The fall of the decline of the oil price, the dismantling of the petrodollar, it's too much. It's too much, and the Saudis have lost their protector. Their protector used to be the U.S. military, Department of Treasury with the Treasury bonds, the Fed with their gold. And now the Saudi gold has been stolen in Switzerland under a long sequence of various events. Their Treasury bonds are all at risk. They have to be redeemed with the Fed. This whole Fed rate hike was a fake. I think it's going to be reversed. The 25 basis point rate hike is going to be reversed, and what we're going to be left with is the second barrel of the hidden QE to infinity, which is the Department of Treasury and their Exchange Stabilization Fund. The Saudis are isolated more than they ever have been before. Abdullah did not like the United States, but he died. And now King Salman doesn't know what America is, doesn't know what Washington is. You might think it's a type of hummus to put on a cracker. He's in senile. His young son, I think he's in his 30s, he had to make a trip to the Kremlin to get a lecture. And I think Putin told him, you will follow our lead, you will get out of Syria, you will dismantle your ISIS network, you will follow our concepts for the oil industry, or we'll have your house fall. And the sheepish son of King Salman, they call him Mohammed, bin Salman, Mohammed. Anyway, they've got a nice little phrase that they call him. I just call him King Salman's son. He's in over his head. He's in his 30s. He's having a wonderful time with this Yemen project of his, and it's going to bring down his nation. They just cannot go executing dozens of Shiites and expect no reaction internally for both demonstrations, riots, rebellions, attacks. Because I think Langley's going to join in this and have some of the ISIS boys come back home to Saudi. I think the ISIS is made up of something like 50 or 70% Saudis. And the Saudis did something that was very telling a couple weeks ago. They told 1,000 prisoners in the Saudi jails, you will fight for ISIS and fight well, or we'll have you beheaded next week. So I think a bunch of them signed up for ISIS. Not sure. Oh, I tell you, this Arab Spring by Obama has turned out to be an absolute, unequivocal disaster. The United States has lost respect internationally. We've lost the support of Egypt. Our boy on the scene was pushed out. I think his name was Nasser. Now you've got a general in charge who's buddies with the Russians. And here's kind of an indication of how Egypt is not on board with Washington anymore. The Turks shot down an aircraft from the Russian Air Force near their border, the Syrian border of Turkey. And Russian retaliation was to urge the Egyptians to stop fruit and vegetable exports to Turkey and instead send them to Russia, which doesn't sorely need them, but yeah, they need more fruits and vegetables after bans from the European
EU.
nations. Yeah, the EU. So Egypt complied. They're establishing more and more in the way of trade with Russia. They're getting tighter in military purchases, weaponry. And the only thing British or American about Egypt anymore is the name of their currency, the Egyptian pound.
Right,
So
right.
the Saudi Spring is going to result in the fall of the House of Saud. The Arab Spring has hit Saudi land. And I've been trying to mark down all the different factors relevant to knock down and destroy the Saudi kingdom. It's a disgusting kingdom. They use Islam as a smokescreen to spread terror across the Mideast and oppose any Arab monarchy that's not Sunni. And that means they attack all the Shiites and the Syrians, which are called the Alawites. The Alawites, it's kind of like a renegade Arab tribe. It's the Phoenicians from biblical days.
Okay.
The Phoenicians have a long history of a couple thousand years of really not being good team players, really not being good trade partners. They're in it for themselves. And, they've got Syria, and ISIS is attacking the hell out of them. ISIS is taking their oil fields in the south. ISIS is taking the northern Iraq and some of the Kurdistan oil fields. And Wall Street's buying discounted oil, just like the Turkish government figures are involved in. I mean, you can go on and on about Saudi Arabia,
Right,
but
right, right. I think you've given a pretty good assessment of it. So that is something that's one hotspot that we have identified at the beginning of this year that I believe is going to get much hotter as this year progresses, and as most likely will Turkey. And what do you make out of that incident with Turkey shooting down the I guess at the behest of NATO, the Russian jet and Russian fighter plane, and there's all this tension that has been created between Russia and Turkey, which were basically allied not too long ago when we were talking about building the Turk Stream, etc. But that seems to have gone out the window. So what do you? And Erdogan is not a well-liked leader in Turkey. So as is happening with the Saudi monarchy, do you expect something similar to occur in Turkey as well?
absolutely. By shooting down the Russian aircraft, the military aircraft, it assured the fall of the Erdogan regime. And I don't care if he was reelected. I don't care if he had a good popular vote. I think that was probably rigged, much like the Bush reelection and the Obama reelection. Um, Turkey's going down the toilet, and what I'm hearing is that Turkey's going to get carved up.
That's
Erdogan wants to expand and revive the Ottoman Empire, and instead, what he's going to get is a reduction of the Turkish landmass. There are going to be deals, I think, struck where Turkey gives up some land, and Syria gives up some land, and Iraq gives up some land, and a Kurdistan state is formed.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that'll cause some peace in the region, which will really get Washington angry, because they're not about peace. The Russians have already met with the Kurdistan leaders, and it's not like you can say, well, the president of Kurdistan met with the ambassador of Kurdistan. No, there are no presidents, there are no ambassadors, they're tribal leaders.
It sounds like the days of Lawrence of Arabia with all this tribal stuff, back in the vogue 100 years after the original Arab Springs.
Yeah, and there's other borders that are going to get carved away. Now, wouldn't it be interesting if Russia gets control of the Bosphorus Straits? I mean, gosh, Turkey's doing everything wrong possible. They're being exposed as heavily involved with ISIS. I've been saying this for a year. The Ankara, Turkey U.S. Embassy is the field operation headquarters for ISIS. We abuse the U.S. Embassy in Libya. We're abusing the U.S. Embassy in Turkey. We're the exceptional nation. Exceptional how? Exceptionally corrupt. We don't honor the rules internationally of what an embassy should be all about. We were running weapons through Benghazi, Libya. Now we're operating a terrorist organization in Turkey. I mean, what are we doing with the U.S. Embassy in Israel? What are we doing with the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon? What are we doing with the U.S. Embassy in Jordan? How about Egypt? What are we doing there? I think they're all illegal operations going on. But the long and the short of it with Turkey is that the Turkish military is now really seriously considering removing Erdogan from office and setting up a military regime, a tribunal, a military coup, a palace challenge. They're being confronted by the Russian military. And if Turkey wants an expanded war with Russia, they better plan on how they're going to act at the surrender talks in 1 month. I think we're going to see.
Do you think Turkey might be counting on the support of U.S. And the NATO, or they are going to be left to fend for themselves?
the actions in the last 2 or 3 weeks since before Christmas make it very, very clear that the U.S. and NATO have already abandoned Turkey.
Mm.
Kerry, Secretary of State Kerry, with his reconstructed jaw, went to the Kremlin, met with Putin and their foreign minister Lavrov, tail between legs, and made some 180-degree about faces with respect to Syria and Turkey. Kerry told them, it's okay now, no matter what Obama has to say. Obama's just a little marionette having gay parties in the White House, attending fundraisers and playing golf. That's his job. Gay parties, fundraising, and golf. That's his job. Obama said King Assad must go from Syria. No compromise. Well, Kerry said, yeah, compromise. The Pentagon is not behind that. So, we've done an about-face regarding Assad and his continuance in Damascus, Syria. Kerry also said that they were to put pressure on Erdogan and Turkey to remove all their troops from Iraq and Syria. Okay, that's kind of a 180-degree turn, maybe 179. Something is going on with respect to the Pentagon. I think they've been notified that Russia has some very serious advanced military weapons and devices, and the United States just doesn't want to get in the way. They don't want to suffer the losses. They don't want to see a group of naval destroyers sunk with thousands of men. I mean, that's a public relations gaffe. They don't want that. They don't want an aircraft carrier sitting on its side in the Mediterranean in shallow waters like the Italian pleasure cruise liner a couple of years ago.
Right,
They don't want that. So we're making concessions, and for the first time in 40 years, the United States military has no presence in the Persian Gulf.
That's quite significant. Almost in my lifetime, I've never seen that. So there has to be something really significant going on behind the scenes for them to leave that area.
I think China's basically filled that vacuum, and their constant presence in the area has invited the United States to leave, especially after certain long-range, very accurate cruise missiles were fired by the Russians from the Black Sea, 1,500 miles from Syria, to hit Syrian targets and ISIS strongholds. So Americans saw a device, a weapon from the Russians on display. And they don't want an Iran-based similar cruise missile knocking out U.S. warships and aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf. So they went home. I think the U.S. is going to go home from the eastern end of the Mediterranean. They're going to focus on the Italian and Spanish and French end, the western end. But I think NATO is breaking up, Dash. And
you did talk about that a while back, in one of our programs, maybe more than one, that we discussed about the future of NATO. And yes, you did mention that's a likely outcome. That Germany will leave NATO.
They're not supporting Turkey, and I've gotten some surprising messages from clients of mine saying, "What do you think? What do you think is going on with Turkey? Do you think NATO is going to support Turkey?" And I wrote back and said, "NATO includes Turkey. Turkey's a NATO member."
Right, that's right.
And the rest of the question is, will the rest of NATO abandon their NATO partner in Turkey? And the answer is yes. And it brings about enormous narcotics questions. And this is not just jackass shooting his mouth off. There are all kinds of research and documentaries about the Turkish connection with U.S. government narcotics programs, especially since 2003, and well, more like 2001, when the U.S. moved in to take over the Afghanistan heroin. The war afterwards was to solidify the progress that they had made in 2000 and 2001 after the Soviets left. But the point is that NATO is breaking down. You can't say, oh, look, NATO is shattered. No, there are indications and elements of NATO breaking, and I'll give you a couple. The Germans said, we don't like what's going on with ISIS. There are a lot of ISIS targets out there. They're not getting hit. There's no progress on it. We're going to support the Russians and their military efforts to destroy ISIS. Wow. That's a NATO member saying we're going to ally with Russia and destroy ISIS targets supported by the U.S. security agencies in Langley and the Mossad in Israel. That's significant. France did the same. And on a typical British faggy response, Cameron went to Paris and said, we will support you with weapons for your battle against ISIS. We'd rather not make a public statement of supporting Russia. So the faggy response from the British, the limp-wristed, cowardly act from the British leaders also worked against NATO. So with the British, the French, and the Germans not working with the American Supreme Commander in charge of NATO, who gives orders to all their presidents and prime ministers, I think NATO is doomed. You also have the Italians who are making their own rumblings and working against NATO and against ISIS. But the Italians don't seem to be working in the same room as the Russians. The French and Germans are working in the same room as the Russian military. President Hollande of France is openly working with the Russians. So I think we're going to see a lot of interesting things happen this year with respect to the European Union, NATO, the sanctions against Russia. I think we're likely to see the European Union commissioners, namely the junta of dictators. Europe is a dictatorship now. They have individual member states that conduct elections and have leaders, but they all take orders from the European Union commissioner dictators, the junta of dictatorship. I think we're going to see the dictators in the EU Commission make pronouncements about the Russian sanctions, but the member nations are all going to go their own way and reestablish commercial ties with Russia.
I suppose they've been working actively to that goal under the table anyhow for quite some time now, especially Germany and Russia.
Well, I think you're right, but what I'm looking for is kind of a final seal of approval where the Russians come out and say, given all the progress we're having with the member states to not to undermine, but to resolve these Russian sanctions and move forward, not using the word undercut, not using any kind of word like rebellion against the EU, but Putin is going to make a statement sometime in 2006 perhaps where, given all the progress to resolve differences with the Russians, we are now lifting our food ban from Europe, and the European nations will start seeing benefits of exporting food products, which is fruit, vegetables, meats, and all kinds of stuff.
Right. Cheeses and chocolates.
I'm looking for that seal of approval by Putin, and I think we might see hints of it in the next few months.
Excellent. So Turkey, you think, is headed the same way as we'll have a Turkish spring, maybe a Turkish summer or whatever. Things will heat up there, and that's another hot spot now that has come into view. at the beginning of 2016. Let's moving into the
Well,
domestic.
the big question, Dash, on resolution of Turkey is: will they have a military tribunal, like a military junta, a military coup? Will the military remain in charge, or will they have an opposition party? I think they're going to have a transition government in Turkey of a military tribunal.
That sounds logical.
While they work to negotiate carved off territories in Turkey to resolve differences with their neighbors.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable, Jim. That sounds
Yeah.
reasonable. Okay, domestically, with the beginning of this year, the stock market that hasn't had a stellar start to the year, and a lot of reasons are being given for it. The oil prices, the Chinese economy apparently is not doing well. So for all those reasons, but I'm sure that the real reasons are nothing to do with what's being reported in the mainstream media. So what's going on with the stock market in the U.S. and even worldwide? And what do you think? Is there any connection to the Chinese economy, Chinese currency devaluation, etc., or is that just that the U.S. economy, as we have discussed many times in the past, has been in the crapper, let's say, for a while now, and this is the logical consequences of all the things that have been done since 2008, not to resolve the problems, but to exacerbate them?
Well, let's look back at some of the origins of the U.S. Economy problems. In the 1980s, when we were not on the gold standard, let's look back to the first full decade when we were not on the gold standard. U.S. industry was outsourced to the Pacific Rim, followed by outsourced to the emerging markets, followed by outsourced to China. How'd that work out? Not very well. A lot of unemployment in the United States.
Oh, is it? I thought it was only 5% now.
What's 5%? You lost me.
Unemployment, officially, is 5% or something like that, isn't it? It's Obama's always running around saying how good the employment is in America.
Well, I hope he continues, because that's how he loses his credibility. Unemployment's somewhere between 22 and 24%. That's if you count people who aren't working who want to work. Okay, so you've had 2 or 3 decades of outsourcing, which has gutted the U.S. industry, brought down the wage scale of American workers, weakened the unions, caused tremendous loss of net worth for American households, brought about tremendous insecurity in the labor market. And then in the last decade, we had QE, monetary policy, which is third world hypermonetary inflation. I just had a conversation while I wanted to go watch some bowl games. So I went to this sports bar and had a meal, bumped into a friend of mine that I hadn't seen in about a year. And he introduced me to an East Coast University statistics and economics professor. I hadn't met the guy before. And my friend introduced us and said, "Hey, I want you to meet Jim here. Jim's an economist, and he's got a newsletter, and apparently doing well, and has a good grip on what's going on with the situation." So I was introduced to this professor, and we got talking about things, and it became clear to me he didn't know what QE was. He didn't know what our bond purchase program was at the Fed. He didn't know that it had hidden volume. He didn't know that they were exported to the BRICS, Belgium, Luxembourg, Ireland, the Cayman, and the Swiss. He didn't know anything about that. He didn't know what reverse repo was. And when I tried to focus on QE, I got these weird looks from him, and I said, "Are you familiar with what QE is?" And he said, "Yeah, it's the rescue of the bond market. It's support of the bond market." And I said, "Yeah, and that a whole lot more. It's a lot of underground redemption of toxic bonds from Wall Street banks." He said, "Well, yeah, I don't know about that, but that makes sense." And I said, "Well, we can't conduct a Zimbabwe-like monetary policy." "Well, what do you mean by that, Jim?" And I said, well, we're printing money and covering our $1 trillion in debt. And he said, oh, so you think printing money to cover debt is a bad thing? What would happen if we didn't? And I said, what's happening if we do? When we do? And he said, well, I don't want to get into that. I finally said to him, well, I'll tell you what, have your fun here. Let's watch some bowl games, because it's very apparent to me you don't know jack shit about economics, yet you're a professor. And we moved on. I basically said to him, wow, look at her. She has a nice figure. That's how we transitioned from QE and the economy. All right, so we had outsourcing for 3 decades to gut American industry. Now we've had 5 years of QE to basically undermine capital, working capital in the U.S. economy. This is a very devious, it's not hidden. It's difficult to detect. It's not secretive. It's just hard to notice. And I don't find more than 2 or 3 economists plying their trade in the United States or in the English-speaking world who notice that QE kills capital. So what we're seeing now is a delayed effect, a cumulative effect, better word, after the 2011 installation of QE, which I said would go on forever. And I was told, oh, another stupid thing coming out of your mouth, Jim. Whereas 2 years earlier, I said the move by the U.S. Fed toward 0% would be, again, forever. Oh, Jim, another stupid thing coming out of your mouth. QE is never going to be forever, and 0% interest rate policy is never going to be forever. To which I say now, how come they're seeming to be forever if I was so stupid in 2009 and 2011? All right, so why is the U.S. economy doing so badly? Outsourcing, the QE undermine of working capital, the fall of the oil sector, the global economy going into the crapper from too much debt, and again, the QE is undermining the working capital even in emerging market nations. And the dollar rising is wrecking the global economy because all these other nations are seeing their currency go down.
Right.
As their currencies go down, all their import prices go up. So what they do is they import inflation. When the U.S. knuckleheads, clowns, and morons running our economic policy give us interpretations that the rising dollar exchange rate is good for us.
No, it's not. No, it's not. I'll give you an example too, Jim. A lot of Canadians, snowbirds, they go down to Florida, and Florida is very dependent on this, Canadian money that comes down there every winter. And this year, because our currency has been hammered because of the rise in the U.S. dollar, I mean, Florida's, they're crying down there because, the Canadians are not showing up. So that's just one small example of how this rising U.S. dollar is hurting, the emerging or developed countries, whatever, Australia, Canada. It's hurting everybody.
Oh yeah, and add to that list of Canadians, New York, Boston, and
Right.
Chicago.
Sure.
They're all not coming down to Florida in numbers as snowbirds. And I was a snowbird in 1999. I know the phenomenon. I met a lot of people down there, and it's we're undermining the global economy with QE. We undermine the U.S. economy with outsourcing. The rising dollar is wrecking the global economy. And now we're starting to see some effects, like in a 1-week 1,000-point drop in the U.S. Dow Jones Stock Index. This is just the beginning. We've had some messages given by Fisher. Fisher's the Dallas Fed, I call him governor, but I think they're officially called presidents. He runs the Dallas Fed.
Right.
The Federal Reserve Board is made up of all these different Fed presidents, like from Richmond or from Chicago, from Philly, from New York, from San Francisco, and Fisher's from Dallas. He actually went on and told one of the talking boobs, one of the hosts, pretty blonde hosts from CNBC, that the stock market and the bond market are both rigged and controlled by the Fed. And that rigging and support is going to come off. And this is really horrifying news for total idiots like Kramer and some of the idiots who sit as anchor posts who talk about the improving U.S. economy and, you know, the steady progress we're seeing in the U.S. labor market. We're getting a divergence. The message is going in continued positive tones, while the reality is going into increasingly negative channels that are just echoing reality. We've got news that we're down to 5% in the unemployment rate. Well, that's the unfortunate few who are continuing to collect state unemployment insurance. Okay, but the real unemployment is approaching 23 and 4%. It was only 22% a year ago. Well, it's getting worse. While we're getting the official unemployment rate going down from 7% to 5.5%. And people on the campaign for president are actually mentioning the distorted U.S. economic statistics. I mean, this is stuff that George Orwell will giggle about.
Right. It's double speak at its best.
Yeah, and this is only going to get worse. We're moving into la la land. I call it surreal. It's getting more surreal every month. You pick up the newspaper and you say, well, that's not the world I live in. I mean, the New York Times business section has very little based in reality. They have some. We've got a phrase in my statistics world. It says that you've got reality in the components, but the macro story doesn't reflect the deterioration in the individual components. In other words, you got all the components adding up to the big picture. They cite negative stories for all the 10 components and then conclude that the macro picture is still looking good. Well, how's it looking good when all the components are bad? I mean, it's like saying 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 12. It doesn't work. The math doesn't work. Right. The math has not worked for a long time, Dash.
So
the stock market is starting to reflect reality, and we've gotten news 2 or 3 weeks ago that the big banks are not going to receive the final big bank bailout, too big to fail support. The Fed is now announcing they're just not going to support some of the things going on regarding big bank failures and big bank losses and big bank problems. Okay, well, you know, the winds are getting ugly, and the winds are blowing over the banners in Wall Street and some of their false messages and bullshit. Reality is starting to enter the room in Wall Street stock indexes. I don't think it'll ever hit reality, though, in the bond market. I think that we're going to see a wreckage of the stock market while the bond market remains seemingly in good stead. In other words, the bond yields are going to be okay for U.S. government treasury debt while the stock indexes falter. I think Wall Street's putting on gigantic shorts right now for the stock market, just like Robert Rubin did when he resigned early in June of 2006, so he could go play the stock market and short the shit out of it. The Treasury Secretary left 6 months early in the Clinton II administration so he could short the shit out of the U.S. stock market and make a few billion in his private account. That's what's going on now again. Wall Street's putting on their big shorts. They're going to profit from the decline. The knucklehead Americans are going to hang on to their stocks because they don't know how to short, and they're certainly not going to sell.
So whatever wealth effect might have been generated over the last few years by the levitation of the stock market and all these, teachers, professors, firemen, etc., that might have had a few dollars in their pension funds, all those are going to evaporate then.
I think so, yeah, and it might not be slow. 1 week, 1,000 points. So what are we going to get? Another couple weeks of 1,000 more points? And then we finally get a bump up of 400 points, and the Wall Street clowns and the talking tits. I'm sorry, the very attractive women who don't know anything about finance, but who do know how to lure men to watch the TV shows called CNBC. They are going to say the worst is over, and it'll be a bear trap, and then we'll go down more. No, Wall Street's going to short the shit out of the stock market.
So it's a good time to get out of it then, if whoever might still be engaged in it.
I've been saying for the last month or two, Dash, wouldn't it be a good time now for the private individuals to sell their mutual funds, sell their big stock positions, while the Fed and Wall Street are propping the prices up? Right. And with the proceeds from their sales, to go out, take the money, and buy a lot. Buy a truckload, buy a busload, buy a little cartload, if you're smaller, of gold and silver bars and coins, which the same agencies, the Fed and the Wall Street banks, are keeping down in price. Sadly, American people prefer to buy something that's expensive and already has risen, rather than something that's done having risen and buy something that's suppressed in price. And I think it's going to cause the loss of a couple trillion in household wealth. A couple of trillion in household wealth. This is the march to the third world.
It seems like that way for sure, Jim. It seems like that way. And I know, I don't want to get into it here, but I know people in Chicago, down in Florida, etc. And the stories I hear, they absolutely reflect this reality that you're speaking about. It does not reflect the CNBC world. So talking about, another example for another reality is that now that we've gone through the holiday season, we've gone through Black Friday and all that, and retail has been catastrophic. Macy's just laid off thousands, everywhere. So how can the economy be going gangbusters like they tell us if the retail sector is sinking like the Titanic?
Well, it can't. I think it was in the December, maybe it was the November hat trick letter. I had a good page and a half of nothing but economic distress stories. Macy's was one of them, and I've come to learn that there's not a single department store that's open in downtown Pittsburgh where I grew up. Not a single one. Macy's was the last. Gimbel's is gone long ago. Horns is gone long ago. Kaufman's is gone long ago. Macy's moved in, and now they're gone. I mean, you could say that this is, the attack of the suburban malls, but you can more accurately say this is the attack of the online businesses. But it's also very clearly decline of the U.S. economy. We got told by the same idiots running our economic policy that outsourcing was a good low-cost solution, reduce the costs for U.S. consumption while the U.S. could continue to go out and consume. Consuming is not a good economic activity. Investing is. The U.S. has lost its way. I've been saying for a year now, Americans do not know what money is, and they do not know what working capital is, and they do not know what a functioning, strong economy looks like. We got fake money. We've got deteriorating acid drip on our working capital from QE, the Fed's monetary policy. And we've got a situation where the government tends to think if we hand out money to the citizens, they can keep on consuming and keep our labor market strong, when the opposite is true. We need to invest in businesses. But instead, what we've done, the Obama administration has made more progress on this than any other administration. They've opened the door to Chinese dominance in free trade zone in all 50 states. You've got over 300 or 400 companies working in the U.S. states that are Chinese-based predominantly, and they are doing the capital investment, not Americans. Americans are doing the consuming. They consumed the home equity. They got defrauded out of a few $1 trillion in their home equity. Not a single Wall Street executive went to prison. Not a single Wall Street company was charged with a felony. They all have what they call deferred prosecution, which means that the U.S. Justice Department maintains the right in a future date to charge Goldman Sachs with billions of dollars worth of bond fraud. But they never will in the future. They will just defer that prosecution. You're right. Okay, so Americans need to understand what money is. Americans need to understand what business capital is. Americans need to understand that consumption is not the solution, but rather investment. And while this is deteriorating, Dash, we're going to see an armada of foreign investors. They might even be called carpetbaggers, like I do. I call them carpetbaggers. The foreign investors are going to come in, take over a lot of deteriorating, distressed American businesses, and be the new management class.
Yes.
For Americans. I got a new job. There's a new business opened up by a German group. I got a new job. A big little foundry. It was opened up by a Chinese group. I got a new job. It was just opened up by an Argentine group. I got a new job. It was just opened up by, strangely enough, a Swiss group. But predominantly, they're going to be Asian and Chinese.
Well, if you want to see the template for that, you should come to Toronto. It's already happened here.
I think you've been doing it for 20 or 30 years.
Right, yeah. So that's the future of America. And
I call it the reindustrialization of America.
Right.
Because Americans don't know how to do it. They've been miseducated as to what business and finance and economics are all about. They don't know what money is. They don't know what capital is. The Obama administration regards capital as something that you can tax and that you can undermine through continued printing of money. I learned in school that hyperinflation does a severe damage to capital. I learned that a long time ago. Why are our central bankers telling us that that's not the case? Because they're printing themselves money. This Fed in 2008 printed itself $23 trillion worth of grants, low interest grants to the owners of the Fed. $23 trillion in loans. The gold standard would eliminate that fraud. And that's why the U.S. leaders don't want the gold standard. They want to be able to print themselves money. They want to be able to give trillions in low-interest grants that will never be paid off. I call them grants, they call them loans. I call them grants because they're never going to be paid off. $23 trillion came out of the Ron Paul. Ron Paul fought with the financial regulatory bill, which is a great story all in itself. I mean, the outcome of the Lehman incident resulted in Congress taking charge and saying, we need better bank regulation. So Ron Paul and a bunch of senators started it, but eventually it got taken over by Citigroup and Goldman Sachs, from banker committee, campaign donations, in other words, payola, fraud, payoffs. And eventually, the Dodd-Frank Financial Regulatory Bill was written by Citigroup and Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. They wrote it. And then their own guys who are also bribed on the committee approved it. And, you know, guys
isn't,
like...
Isn't that how Washington works anyways? Pharmaceutical industries write their own, regulations. So does the, whatever, the energy boys, everybody.
The Communications Commission,
right.
They do the same thing. Yeah. But Barney Frank used to be my representative. I lived in Newton, Massachusetts. It's hard to call it a suburb. It was more like a residential city surrounding Boston.
I feel for you, Jim. I feel for you.
I lived on the Green Line. I actually bumped in on a Sunday. I bumped into Barney Frank. I said, "Hey, Barney, how you doing?" He was going into a bread shop,
right,
buying coffee, and walked out with coffee and bread. "Hey, how you doing, Barney?" Roly-poly Barney. It's sad what's going on, but Barney Frank decided that after all the payoffs that he got for allowing the Dodd-Frank Bank bill to be written by Wall Street, I'm leading up to a little climax here. Barney Frank decided, hey, I can retire on all these bribes. So he retired. And his Dodd-Frank bill is crystallized in history as his crowning accomplishment. But Ron Paul was given a compromise by the Wall Street banks. Ron Paul wanted a big, fat audit of the Fed. And they gave him a small independent audit of the Fed, where the Fed blocked a lot of things. But in the course of the independent audit of the Fed, which Ron Paul wanted and Ron Paul got, they found out $23 trillion in 2 waves of loans at near 0% to the owners of the Fed.
That would be J.P. Morgan and...
the Warburg family,
right,
the Rothschild,
right.
hidden elements, and others. So the Lehman Brothers incident resulted in grants to the Fed's owners of $23 trillion, which is more than the U.S. government debt.
That could have solved a lot of problems, couldn't it, if it was directed to the right areas?
Oh, I disagree. I know that sounds like a really nice liberal and socialist argument. You try to put in just a few trillion in cash to solve poverty and set things up, and what you're going to get is mammoth price inflation.
Okay, I hear you. What's required is capital. I agree, Jim. That's a wrong assessment, and I retract.
What we need is that money to be devoted into new capital investment to reindustrialize the United States.
Yes.
We don't need helicopter drops of $10,000 on every family. We need $1 million grants for qualifying business plans for recapitalizing the United States economy. No one would like to hire me as an economic advisor because I work against everything they stand for.
Yes. What we need is new factories, not more welfare. I agree. So anyhow, so that's again is more evidence of those things that you have discussed in my program, and what you have written about in your newsletters and discussed with other hosts about what you anticipated would happen in the future in your country, and it seems like it's happening now faster than ever before. And this year, as the stock market, if it continues this trend, it could be a very watershed year, and things could really get ugly pretty fast over the next few months.
Well, I think so. We actually have twin Fishers now who are spokesmen of the problem. You've got the Fisher from the Dallas Fed saying that all the stock and bond markets are rigged, and without the Fed pulling them up and their Wall Street agents pulling them up, they'd all collapse. But you've also got the Israeli vice chair of the Fed, Fisher, he's the Fisher with a C in there. You got two Fishers. The Americans has no C, and the Israeli has a C. He's coming out and saying, we've exhausted all our options and tools, and we don't have anything left to keep this thing going. Whoa! So, we got one guy saying the financial markets in the U.S. are all rigged, and you have the other guy from the helm who's working with Janet Yellen, who's really a total turkey. I don't think she knows really much of anything about what's going on right now, but she did take the job. I give her some credit. You know, she opposed Greenspan and opposed the New York Fed head way back in 2005 and 6, Dudley. I was struggling for his name as I was talking. She opposed Dudley and Greenspan back in 2005 and 2006 and said, we're going to get a mortgage bond eruption here soon. And they said, no, you're not a team player, Janet. So she was proven right, and now her reward is she gets to become Emperor Nero of the financial sense, to watch it all fall apart. But Fisher from the Israeli central bank, who came over as an import, Fisher recently, in the last week or so, has made a number of statements. He's saying we're out of tools. We have really no tools left except to amplify what we're already doing. In other words, expand QE. QE has been expanded in a number of ways, Dash. In October of 2013 rather. No, wait a minute. October of 2014, sorry. We confiscated, the U.S. Fed confiscated the Japanese government pension fund, and they responded and converted them to treasury bonds. And they responded by announcing infinite QE. QE has been a fixture in Japan now for 23 years, but we think we can have one just for a year or two. I think it's going to be forever until the U.S. government debt default. All right, so that was a QE expansion. And then a couple of years ago, QE was also expanded to the BRICS, as opposed to the BRICS. That's Brazil, Russia, China, etc. The BRICS is a hidden export of QE to Belgium, Luxembourg, Ireland, Cayman, and Switzerland. They have an equal volume of treasury bond purchases in the last 2.5 years as the Fed. What I'm saying is an admitted $400+ billion in treasury bond purchases. Okay, that could be combined with Chinese dumping, could be combined with Eurostream, which is their clearinghouse, could be combined with a number of things. And now we've got the fake Fed rate hike. They talked about a 25% basis hike, but what they did not give stress to adequately, and the financial idiots out there who call themselves analysts didn't pick up on it, the reverse repo expansion, as they called it, was really a handoff to the U.S. Department of Treasury to rely upon national security and the Exchange Stabilization Fund to do additional bond purchases. And evidence of that was in August, September, and October. China dumped $250 billion worth of treasury bonds, and there was no tangible effect in the bond market, which meant somebody soaked it up, and it wasn't the Fed. It was the Department of Treasury. So we're now at DEFCON 1, DEFCON 1 of the Fed teaming up with the Department of Treasury, double-barreled infinite QE.
Right. So this, again, like you called it, a fake rate, and you expect even that fake rate to be reversed in the near future, which when in actuality, it's the QE is not just been continuing, it's probably in a state of expansion, as it must needs be.
I think while the energy market was experiencing its, what's the word? Not palpitations. What do you call it when you shiver like crazy? You're kicking through heroin.
Withdrawals or
convulsions.
Convulsions.
Yeah. While the bond market was going through its convulsions in a hidden way, we saw, well, we didn't see. We were given indications that only the people with their eyes open and their brains functioning could notice. We're seeing an expansion of QE. I don't look at the official. They say, well, we're on QE3 still. No, we're on about QE7. Operation Twist was really QE3. QE3 was really QE4. The Japanese confiscation of pension fund was really QE5. The Blix was really QE6. And now the expansion is QE7 for Exchange Stabilization Fund. We're up to QE7 now, but we were told it would just be 6 months back in 2011. Yeah, how'd that work out, Dasha? How'd that work out?
Well, I don't even need to answer that. I'm sure, like, our listeners are well aware of how it's worked out. So no surprise there. You did say that many moons ago that QE would be endless, and it certainly is proving to be the case. Now, in regards to this QE, what's happening in China? I read recently that China is probably going to need to dump another trillion or so of their reserves this year to defend the yuan because of it's being devalued it has been devalued considerably over the last year or so, and they will need to continue to. They dumped some 400 billion, I believe, last year, but they'll need to do more than that this year. What can you tell us about what's going on in China? We hear a lot of conflicting reports in the mainstream. So what is the reality on the ground there?
Well, you mentioned that China dumped $400 billion worth of their reserves in the last year. Really? You sure they didn't dump it 2 years ago?
No, I'm not sure at all, because I don't know, these stories.
We're not told the truth about anything
right.
on finance.
Right.
So now what we're hearing is that China is officially admitting reduction in their reserves.
Right.
Could they maybe have committed $100 billion worth of sales every few months a couple of years ago for locking down the purchase of, say, African assets, port facilities in Australia, mining facilities in Indonesia, Philippines, Australia, also New Zealand? I think we're entering a comedy stage now, where Westerners think they know what's going on with Chinese finance. And they claim numbers, and they stand on soapboxes, and they say China's in trouble.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people are saying that. Even in the alternative press, they're saying that.
Well, I think they're all a bit deluded. China still has significant reserves. China has been accumulating in the last 20 or 30 years probably 30,000 tons worth of gold. China does not have any externally held debt. To be sure, they have debt, but it's not foreigners who hold it. Half the U.S. government debt is held by foreigners. So why is China worse off than us? China has lots and lots. They have just fields of factories that were constructed after 1999, when Hong Kong was returned to the Chinese from the British. After a lot of different foreign direct investment in 2003, 4, 5, during the constructive engagement phase of U.S.-Chinese relations, China's got lots and lots of factories. What does the U.S. have? We got Detroit, we got Chicago, we got Cleveland, we got upstate New York, we got Pittsburgh. Do we know anything about what's going on in the United States when we're talking about China? They've got fully paid for unoccupied cities. We've got deteriorating slums in the United States, yet China is worse off than us. They've got cheap labor and ample labor with very good science and engineering and math scores, a fast rise in patents, while the U.S. has declining math science skills and reduced requirements to get a high school degree. I used to laugh shortly after college when I learned that, oh my gosh, they're watering down the math requirements for a high school degree in the United States. Well, now they don't even have a health requirement. I mean, you know, back in high school, health was a bit of a joke. A couple days a week, we had an anatomy class, and that was interesting. It had some value. A couple days a week, we had the equivalent of what I call dodgeball. You know, everybody puts on shorts and t-shirts and tennis shoes, and you know, we throw a basketball around, or we play dodgeball. Okay, that's good. That's to make sure that you know how to break a sweat. So you learn how to break a sweat. Well, they've eliminated the health class requirement in American high schools. Yet somehow Chinese are worse off than us. We've got obesity. And somehow the Chinese are better, are worse off than us. Now, the Chinese have a huge labor pool, a huge industrial plant, huge gold reserves, and they're about to ditch the dollar. I think what's going on is that the Chinese have let it be known to the world, we're giving up on this dollar game. We're going to turn to the RMB currency as a tool, as a transition tool toward the gold standard. And I think the gold standard is going to come and make a debut this year. I think it's going to come in the form of a gold trade note that's used as letter of credit for trade payments. And later you're going to see perhaps how the RMB is going to be interchangeable with the gold trade note. And that could be how eventually we will see the Chinese currency being gold back, and when that happens, all hell's going to break loose, and the Chinese will be joined by the Russians, joined by the Germans, and joined by maybe even the Australians will learn how to kick out the neocon Nazis and develop an actual currency with some of their ample resources. Australia's got huge resources, but huge debt. I mean, very few people know what happened in Australia. The Bush II administration encouraged Australia to go bankrupt with lots and lots and lots and lots of weapons purchases that the U.S. weapons manufacturers loved. And now they've got these huge debts. So they got all this gold that China's buying up in the form of unmined ore. They got all these ports that they already sold to the Chinese. Yet China's worse off than the U.S. We've got an $18 trillion deficit, growing $1 trillion every year, $500 billion in trade deficit, deteriorating industrial base, deteriorating labor pool. Yet somehow China's going down the drain, and what are we going to do? We're going to take back command of the global economy and no, we're now entering a new phase where nobody gives a rat shit what Washington says. No one gives a backward flying rat turd what Washington wants, like with their trade unions. You're now getting an increasing number of Asian nations saying we're going to join up with the Asian Infrastructure Bank and the Belt and Road, the Silk Road that China and President Xi are developing. We're going to sign up for that, but we're going to pay lip service to the United States for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Just tell the Americans what they want to hear, and we're going to sign up in a tangible way with China and their development. No one gives a backward flying rat shit anymore what Washington has or what the Obama plan is, because most of it has a fascist foundation. These trade unions are fascist platforms where nations' wealth are in control by corporations, where resolution of conflict is decided upon by tribunals set up by corporations, where the internet and information is controlled by corporations.
I would agree with that. So in your according to what you're saying, which I agree with because you have provided ample evidence, is that the reports of the demise of the Chinese economy are premature, to say the least.
They're going through some difficult stages, to be sure, while the U.S. is collapsing. The Chinese are not collapsing. They're going through difficult situation. They're going through some debt resolution. I mean, when you're saying that the Chinese are seeing their, I'm sorry, let me get this right. When the conclusions are being made that the Chinese currency is suffering devaluations, it could be a better description that they're dumping the dollar.
Okay.
That's a much different story.
Well, nobody will mention that in the press here that the dollar is being dumped. They'll always put some lipstick on that pig to make that story, seem less significant than it really is, because that is another one of the topics which has been covered extensively is, of course, not just the petrodollar, which we talked about earlier on, and the how that's going the way of the dodo bird, and also the dollar itself has seen a significant decline in the usage in world trade, and it seems like that is hastening now as it's being fast replaced by the renminbi.
Well, yeah, just look at the sequence that happened with the IMF. Last May or so, the Chinese were rebuffed. They were told, no, we're not going to include the RMB in the basket of the IMF currencies, the dollar, euro, pound, and yen. Okay, well, the Chinese turned around and sold $250 billion worth of treasury bonds. Well, that got Washington's attention. Well, what happened? Well, they told China, you've got to comply with certain standards, and you need certain, accounting standards, and you need international liquidity made available for converting the RMB, like converting RMB to pounds, converting RMB to even Swiss francs or whatever. Well, the Chinese complied. So now they've got an agreement. The reason I bring up the IMF is simple. The IMF has now agreed, and the U.S. has backed this. The British have backed this. And that's, the basis of the banking power, the Anglo-American banking power. The British and Americans have said, okay, the Chinese RMB will join the IMF basket. What that does is it opens the door for the global banking system to take on more Chinese government debt securities.
Right,
and
right.
To do that, they will be dumping treasuries. So, in one breath, we hear the Chinese system is rapidly falling apart. But the decisions have been made for an international rescue from their distress in the form of foreigners buying up the Chinese government debt. Okay, well, sounds like that's a solution for the Chinese distress. What's the solution for the American deterioration? Nothing. Nothing at all. The solution, as it has been described to us, is indications, not explicitly stated, that the Department of Treasury and their Exchange Stabilization Fund will conduct unlimited QE to soak up all the dumped treasuries on the world market. So the world's going to dump U.S. treasuries, and we've given them a green light.
Right. Yes.
And what are they going to do with the money they get with sold treasuries? They're going to buy up Chinese government debt, and they're going to buy up gold bullion. And this could be the year that the COMEX is trumped or just superimposed or
becomes
kicked to the curb or just shut down.
Becomes irrelevant, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. They're not going to be setting the gold price much longer. I don't have timing. Don't send me an email saying, when do you think it's going to happen? I'll give you a dumb answer like sometime in the future.
Let's talk about gold and silver, Jim. Okay, that's actually, I mean, you are the golden jackass after all. So, that is something we should discuss because I think a lot of people are, after many years, I'm seeing signs that a lot of people are getting excited again about precious metals. Is that what you're seeing as well? Gold and silver in particular?
I don't see any great public wave of interest in gold and silver.
No, not public, but in people like in the alternative, arena that have been proponents of gold or that have been recommending gold for a long time. And there was over the last 2 3 years there has been sort of damper put on everyone's spirits in regards to this matter. But it seems like there is not that excitement is starting to build again in the alternative arena. Certainly not in the public, and who knows if it ever will. But that doesn't.
Oh, the Americans will start looking at buying gold when it's back over 3 or 4 thousand. They'll have some ample new interest in gold. I like gold because it's tripled in price. I like gold now. Uh-huh. Well, they don't like buying things when they're cheap and depressed. What do I notice? I just notice that the Asians are buying a lot of gold. I don't see Westerners buying a lot of gold. So, I mean, it's a simple response, and maybe it's a little bit half-assed, but I don't really care anymore, Desh. I don't see any great interest in the West to buy gold. I see some in Germany. They've got little retail, like vending machines. Instead of buying cigarettes, you can buy some gold coins.
Right.
In
Yeah.
Germany. I'd like to see them in the United States, but they might just collect dust in the United States. They might actually be the object of vandalism by the Wall Street bankers. I don't see any great interest in the West. What we do see, and to be fair, is a real big leap in the demand for U.S. mint coins. The coin makers just can't keep up with the demand. So in order to keep the demand reasonably calm, they announced that there'll be not shutdowns, but there'll be delays, which breaks the law. The U.S. Mint is now in violation of the law. The U.S. Treasury Department is in violation of the law, not buying silver at whatever price they can locate it in order to meet the demand. So they're making these long delays, but despite all that, the demand is brisk, and pardon me, there's more silver coin demand in U.S. and Canada combined now than there is silver mine output from the two countries. So
Right.
that's significant. So you do have some indication that things are going well, but until I hear from my own family and some of the more blockheaded friends that I have that they're going out buying gold and silver coins and bars, until I hear that, I'll think it's no big deal yet.
But by the time that time comes, okay, in North America, like I think the rest of the world is a little bit ahead of the curve, especially like you said you were talking about Dubai, and I know how much of that gold is smuggled down to India. I mean, which is still a huge market. They have some official figures, but the unofficial figures I'm sure are double that amount. So the people on a worldwide when you look at it from a worldwide perspective, they are ahead of this purchasing of gold and silver, and so by the time it catches fire in our part of the world, it might already have double, triple, quadrupled, in at least in terms of Federal Reserve notes over the next, who knows, but relatively soon we would think.
The great majority of the profits for gold and silver will be gathered by the Asians,
I agree.
not by the Americans, not by the Canadians. To be sure, there are many Americans and Canadians who will benefit. They're not even remotely a critical mass. And it's sad. I had a conversation a year ago with my father and brother, and I said, my dad said to me, Jim, well, what do you think people should do? I mean, Clearly, it's a mess. I said, Dad, people should close their stock accounts, redeem their CDs, and buy a lot of more solid assets and investments. And my brother said, like what? I said, well, John, you have an economics degree and a Phi Beta Kappa. Buy gold and silver. Oh, that. They don't even know what money is.
Right.
They're going to be asking us for loans later. And here's the kicker. In 10 years, they're going to be asking us to provide them a pension because they screwed up.
Well, that's, at this
They don't know
moment,
what money is.
no,
They don't know what capital is. They don't even know what fascists are. They don't know what investment in business is. They don't know what traders are. We got a dumbing down of America and Canada. A great dumbing down.
people are not educated, they have been re-educated, let's put it that way.
Well, they've been dumbed down.
Yeah.
They've been fed so much nonsense in schools. I mean, I was lucky. I took 3 classes in economics in college, and that gave me a good foundation. But my education in economics was reading Barron's, Business Week, Wall Street Journal, and I started noticing the bias. The bias was most clear in the Wall Street Journal. And as I opened up to read an article, I noticed that next to an article was a mutual fund advertisement.
Right.
As I read a different article in the Wall Street Journal, I noticed that adjoining that was another big Wall Street bank advertisement. So I realized, could they even post something in the Wall Street Journal that was really negative to Wall Street banks and the finance industry? Could they talk about a fidelity fraud? No, they talk about some kind of a settlement that was made. Do they even talk about the MERS database in the Wall Street Journal, which oversold the titles from American homes in a gigantic multi-billion, I mean, it's like a couple $1 trillion fraud with mortgage bond. Does the Wall Street Journal ever talk about the MERS fraud? No. So you're not going to get a really good background, and you call it education, re-education. You're not going to get a good exposure so that a good working mind, like people I know, can come to the right conclusions that something's wrong with this system. We can't just hand out money and expect the economy to improve. We can't just buy up the Wall Street bonds with printed money and expect the economy to improve. There's going to be a backlash to this. And now you're starting to see a few maverick Fed board presidents, governors from the regions, a few representatives from the field on the board. They're starting to bark out and say, we're doing the wrong thing. We've been doing the wrong thing for years. We're not fixing the U.S. economy. We're making it worse. And this is how you really kick the Fed to the curb. And it's going to happen. They're going bankrupt. They're the buyer of last resort. Since when should a central bank own over $2 trillion worth of the government debt?
You're right.
It's a sign that they're broken. It's a sign that they're just a shithouse. It's a sign that they're nothing more than a giant vat of swill. They're a sewage treatment plant with spherical balls collecting at the bottom. That's sludge. I want to see the Fed shut down. I want to see the dollar replaced. And we're going to see the dollar replaced because the threat coming before too long is toward the ports that import things. Because the U.S. now, for over a year, if you count New Jersey, New York, California, and the West Coast, and all the ports, the U.S. in 2015 exported 500,000 empty containers. and brought in products
Right.
and
That,
paid for
that's
them
all.
with treasury bills.
Well,
You cannot export empty containers. I call it exporting foul air because inside them you probably get some rotting substance.
right.
You cannot export air in empty containers for a solid year and import finished goods and other cargo like commodities, pay for them with treasury bills, which the Fed is printing at times $1 trillion worth a month. The world just says, eventually, we've had enough of this. And that's when the U.S. is going to have to come up with its own independent, domestic-only dollar. I call it the Scheich dollar. I'm very irreverent. It is basically a German word for shit, excrement, and discarded crap. Flotsam jetsam. Okay, the Scheich dollar is going to come, and it's going to have a phony foundation. We're going to claim it's gold-backed. No, it's not. It's going to be these Idaho, Nevada, and Colorado hills. We're going to claim there's gold in them thar hills backing up our new dollar. Well, the independent audit's going to disclose that it's full of nothing.
Agreed. Jim, let's close off by what we started off our last program, which is this what's happening with the oil market and the shock or the disastrous effects it's going to have on the derivatives that are associated with it. As I've noticed, the oil price keeps cratering. So, what do you forecast in regards to all the the connected, this is like an octopus. It's got many tentacles. It's not just the gasoline price. The market itself has many other areas that it impacts. So, what can you tell us about that?
Things are going to start breaking in a very big way after oil goes below 30. What do we do? Touch a 34 handle this week? I don't know exactly.
Yeah, I was close around there, yes.
Well, two very big factors have come into play now. One is the Iran nuclear deal that permits Iran from selling their oil.
Right.
Imagine the U.S. unilaterally says, Iran, you're a bunch of bad people, and you wanna destroy Israel, and you have all these really dangerous nuclear devices, and we're gonna just by our neocon Nazi selves, we're gonna make you a rogue state in 2012, and we're gonna wreck you. Okay. Well, now that's all coming undone. They've got 100 million barrels of oil floating around as an inventory off their coasts. The Iran nuclear deal involves an agreement made internationally. The U.S. can't make the rules unilaterally anymore. The Europeans won't let them. That's kind of interesting. The Europeans won't let them anymore. And NATO is not really unified anymore. Okay, so Europe is not really in the U.S. camp much anymore. Okay, so they're allowed to sell 500,000 barrels a day now, and in 3 months, another 500,000, making it a full 1,000,000 barrels a day in 3 months. So by April, we're going to have a flood of oil, and the oil price, will be below 30 by March, April.
And what will the consequences be of that?
I think the big banks that are in deep with bad portfolios, impaired loans, all kinds of wreckage in their credit portfolios with the energy companies, they're going to conclude we're not going to do any more emergency measure loan, patch loans, bridge loans to help these energy companies to make their debt service payments. We're now going to declare that these are bad loans because we're not going to put more good money after bad. Or as my joke is, we're not going to put forth more good fake money after bad. They're going to conclude because, why would a big bank, let's just say Citigroup, why would Citigroup, let's just make up another name, Baker Hughes, they got a debt. Why would Citigroup say to Baker Hughes, we'll give you an $800 million bridge loan so you can make the next payments? Why would they do that? when they do it because they think the oil price might come back and they think the Baker Hughes business might return to viability. If we go down below 30 and it looks like it's going to stay there, and there are more fundamental factors like the U.S. government announcing they're going to lift the export ban, my gosh, it's a frontal assault on the energy credit portfolios.
Oh, yes.
So these big banks are going to announce, Citigroup's going to say to Baker Hughes, sorry, we can't lend any more money. We're not going to do any more bridge loans. We're not going to help you with your debt service. We're not going to give you any loan patches so you can do your borrowing cost management. Not going to do it anymore. And Baker Hughes is going to say, well, then we're going to have to liquidate a third of our business, maybe more. We're going to have to default on some of our bonds, and maybe more than a few. And Baker Hughes won't be alone, and Citigroup won't be alone. What I'm describing is the sub-$30 oil price is going to light a very big fuse for the big banks and cause some contagion. And this, I think, will contribute toward a situation where the U.S. must come up with a new currency for its domestic purposes, and a ravaging dumping internationally of the Treasury bond will take place, and we'll start to see the gold trade note used for trade. You know, when you say that the gold standard's coming back, you really got to be specific. And I have tried my best to be specific. We're going to see the gold standard return, and I think the sub-$30 price will help that process. But it's going to first come in trade. It's then going to come in the banking system. The banking system is going to say we're going to get rid of a bunch of our Treasury bonds. We're going to take in some RMB bonds, comply with the IMF ratio, and we're going to buy up some gold reserves, put it in our banking system because we are very optimistic about the future of the gold price. We think we can recapitalize our banks somewhat on the back of gold. That'll be the banking part of the gold standard. And finally, it's the currencies. The gold trade note will come through trade, and it will facilitate an attitude by the participating countries to make a gold currency and use that currency in the trade payments like they do the gold trade note, which is basically putting up collateral in gold and having a note written against it for payment in trade settlement. I mean, you ask 100 people in the United States, what's a gold trade note? I think you get 99.5% blank stares.
Yes.
I don't think Americans even know what legitimate trade payments are.
Right.
I mean, I'm very critical now, and I got to qualify this. I mean, if people last this long on the interview, we're coming up on 2 hours. There are still 10% of Americans with a functioning brainstem who know that this is a giant problem and that gold is the center of the solution, not handouts and not printing dollars. I give them credit that they've stayed the course. I invite them to sign up for the hat trick letter.
Okay, Jim, that's good. That's a good note to end this on. Thank you. It's been 2 hours, like you said, very, very interesting, very informative as usual. So please go ahead and share your contact information. Give people, the listeners, information about your great newsletter, the Hat Trick Letter, and where they can find it and subscribe to it.
This April, now that we're in the new year, I can talk about, reference points in the new year. This April will be 12 years.
Congratulations. For
the hat trick letter, and I've noticed that a lot of my contemporaries that I met at the Canadian conference circuit, the Cambridge House, a lot of them are pretty much out of business. A couple still are working, and a couple superstars like Frank Holmes, they're still going great guns. But I know a number of people who just don't have a newsletter anymore, and It's sad. It's sad. But anyway, www.goldenjackass.com. No hyphen in there. www.goldenjackass.com. Um, just visit the website. Look at the free web page. I've got I've got 3-4 times as many interviews as I do public articles. Back in 2008, 9, and 10, I had 5 times as many articles as I had interviews. And that gives you an idea of the invitations that I get for doing interviews. I think it's largely because I got a lot of this horrendous disaster unflowing correct. And I give a lot of credit. I'm doing this more often. I give a lot of credit to The Voice and several guys on my team of colleagues. They're really smart people. They digest difficult stories and events well. We don't get fooled much. So when you say, Jim, you got another thing right, no, it's my team got another thing right. I'm kind of the spokesman of the team. I assimilate the information and write the reports. But I don't do it alone. And there are two publications each month. One is called the Global Money War Report. And I call it that because it's no longer the macroeconomic report. Things have already broken. After zero interest rate went in 2009 and after QE went on in 2011, we admitted the whole system was broken. But most of the public didn't figure it out yet because they're just a little bit badly educated and slow afoot. But now it's the Global Money War Report because there's a global financial war. They call it a global financial crisis and even give it the GFC acronym. No, it's a war. Ukraine and Syria are not a crisis, they're a war. The sanction against Russia is not a crisis, it's a war, it's a trade war. Lifting the trade war against Iran is a surrender with a white flag. So the dollar's losing the financial war on the global stage. The other report each month is the Golden Currency Report. That has not changed its nature because it's still a huge battle and it's changing to be sure, but I report on a lot of activity about what's going on in China with respect to gold and markets there, what's going on in India. It's hard to keep up with some of the things in India. They're actually trying to monetize now the gold in Indian temples.
Yes. Actually,
Good luck with that.
No, why? No, I read a report actually by Jeff Nielsen, and he just reported that I think they're using strong arm tactics now, and one of the temples in Mumbai finally gave up their gold. They had such a they only got like 400 grams over the first 6 months or something, but now they got 40 more kilos. But it's still they're gonna have to use like some mafia tactics to get it. That's for sure. But they will. I think they will get a lot of it.
They're gonna start killing people.
Yeah, they will. That's how it'll be done.
I mean, that's what the Americans will advise them. Why don't you kill off some of these guys running the temples, and they'll get the message.
Yeah.
Because that's what Papa Bush did.
Right.
With Scotia Makata, the Toronto-based bullion bank that refused to participate with the Wall Street Bank. So they murdered the founder, and now the whole group has been selling for over 2 years their gold to the Wall Street banks. That's how the criminal enterprises work. Kill a few people. They'll get the message.
Right.
Well, now what we're seeing now, Dash, this is the final comment, is we're seeing the banker cabal on the run. Their narcotics have been cut off in Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and this is Bush family.
Right.
There was a story in Kabul, Afghanistan about Doctors Without Borders that got bombed.
Yes.
That's because the Bush family went in there and made it a heroin distribution center.
Oh, boy.
So it got bombed. The locals saw what was going on. They bombed it. And the Western press made a distorted story. Almost everything having to do with Afghanistan, with Ukraine, with Syria in the U.S. press is a confounded lie. But it's not hard to figure out what's going on after you read the hat trick letter. I encourage people to go in, root around the free area of the website, and sign up for the hat trick letter. And I'm making a general habit now of mentioning the two compliments that I like the most from people who make an order, and they get a direct email from me welcoming them to the newsletter, and a little bit of background information and a little bit of guidance on what to expect from the newsletter and the login procedure, stuff like that. It's a 15, 20 line welcome message, and it's evolved over time. But the two compliments I like the most are, and I heard another one, two of them just last week. It went like this: Jim, I am one of those guys who is going to give you a compliment like what you mentioned. I've been listening to your radio interviews for the last 2 years. I've been reading your public articles, but I was curious about what additional information analysis, tying things together, you might offer in the newsletter. And I've been with you for 3 months now, and I just want to tell you how happy I am with the newsletter and how upset I am that I didn't sign up a year ago. I am one of those that you described, and I got two like that just in the last couple of weeks. The other message that I get is that, I was a subscriber years ago, and I was with you for 3 or 4 years, but I wanted to move around, get some variety, and I came back to your newsletter last year for a good reason. That you're better than many of the other newsletters. You include a lot of information that they don't have, they don't cover, and you've got better sources than they do, and you've got a better forecast record, so I'm back. I like those two compliments. I like them a lot. It puts a smile on my face. I say thanks for the kind words, and I often say I give a lot of credit to the Voice and my team of colleagues. We work hard at this. We work very hard at this, and some harder than others because they have a full-time job. But let me just run down the list. The Voice is an international, I'm looking at a list on my mailing list, international gold trader, but he's more than that. He's a financial consultant, and think of him as a systemic and platform consultant. Like if you want to set up an enormous office for converting assets to gold or creating a foundation for business lending, okay, fine. Another fellow is from San Francisco. He has multiple successful business background, home building, insurance, and a consulting business. Then there's Rob Kirby in Canada. He's a banking expert. He's a bond expert. He used to be a bond trader in Toronto. He's also a derivative expert, and he is my main source for teaching me about various things on derivatives. Then there's London Paul, who is the most recent addition to the team. He works in London. He's a former bank employee. Now he's an independent consultant in finance with clients all across Europe, including Russia. I've got a fellow in near the West Coast who's a mining expert with some petroleum background. He's doing what he can now in the mining industry, but he just keeps telling me that, Jim, there's no lending capital. Okay, so he's my expert in mining and petroleum. I got George of the COMEX, I call him. He has expertise in COMEX in Chicago with both metals and bonds. So he knows paper and metal. Works in Chicago. He has tons and tons of experience, like 15 years experience in COMEX. I have a friend in this area who's a patent electronics engineer, and his perspective is always excellent in things. I have a fellow who's a mortgage expert who is an expat. He left the United States a few years ago, a little bit after I did. He's living in South America now. He's still a financial expert. He's an absolute news hound. He fills my inbox with all kinds of things. I've got Aaron Crown from the Implode Explode website, who was victimized by the banks. They kept suing him until he lost a great deal of money. It's sad. I mean, you could be right in the U.S. legal system. You can be right, but you can also really suffer financially if they keep on suing you with frivolous lawsuits. Then there's Euroraj. He's an ex-London banker and analyst extraordinaire. He is usually the first guy to say, I've got a suspicion about what's really going on here. And then the rest of us follow it and flesh it out. And the last one's little old me with my statistics and economics background from 3 fields in the statistics world: quality control, sales forecasting, and marketing research. Those are 3 very big areas in statistics and analysis. So I invite people to go to the website, goldenjackass.com, root around, and sign up for the newsletter, because this shitstorm is accelerating.
On that note, Jim, I will also, what you have just said in the last few minutes, I will second that your research is excellent. Your information is very detailed. And I love doing programs with you because you're not on a tight schedule. You take as much time as necessary to fill in the details, and that's what the audience loves about the programs we do. And once again, Happy New Year. It's been great having you on. And I'm sure we'll be back in another month or 5-6 weeks, and much will have happened. I think maybe a lot more at an ever accelerating pace this year than it was last year in comparison. So thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure being on, Dash. The final note I'd like to leave people with is that if we were on the gold standard until 1971, and then after 73 we went on the de facto oil standard, how can you deny that the falling oil price is evidence of a dying dollar?
You can't.
You can't. But you can be easily fooled by saying the dollar is rising.
Right.
No, it's not really. The dollar is going up relative to the other currencies because they cannot print money.
Yes.
And there are a whole lot of other reasons, but let me just leave it at that. The dollar is dying. You see it evident in the collapsed oil price, which was the foundation asset class for the dollar. If the dollar were not dying, its basis for the last 40 years would not be collapsing. Take that, you hate mail morons who send me mail saying the dollar's still going up. Jim, you got it all wrong. This is over your head, you morons.
Well, Jim, you did say it's going to go up, 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 and up, and then it's going to go kaboom.
It's going to pop like a big collection of balloons that rise and rise. You know, people who fly, who have pilot's licenses, they know this a whole lot better than people who live on the ground their whole lives. As you rise up in altitude, the air gets thinner, the pressure gets lower.
Right.
So if you have a big stack of like 100 balloons rising, eventually they pop because the external air pressure is so low that the internal balloon air pressure results in expansion to a point where the balloon breaks. And that's what I think is going to happen with the dollar.
All
it's
right.
rising now, and the surface of the balloon is like the emerging market debt. $8 to $10 trillion. It's going to start to go bad, just like the energy sector bad debt. So, I wish
Jim,
everybody a happy New Year. Sign up for the hat trick letter. You won't be disappointed. You'll be pleasantly surprised. You will be certainly challenged. You will regard it as a college economics course on a correspondence level.
Thank you, Jim. Have a great day down there, and we'll be back with you hopefully in the very near future again.
Okay, we have mid-70s here. It's mostly sunny, no wind. I'm going out to do some errands on a lovely day.
All right. Enjoy your day.
Been 2,000 years since the first time I came. But now I can see that man's making no change. I taught you the way that you are could live. But there's way too much taking, and no one will give. Down through the pages of history, there's been many people who thought they could see that their world was ending, but never found me. They say they were looking, I believe they tried. But it's too late for praying when you've already died. It's almost too late. Please don't hesitate. If you want to live forever, it's happened before and will be once more. It's all been a senseless endeavor. The good that was here was intended to stay. But I taught you to reason and live your own way. The world as you know it shall no longer be. Your greed for wealth and power has begun World War III. It's almost too late. Please don't hesitate. If you want to live forever, it's happened before and will be once more. It's all been a senseless endeavor.